I'm locking. If you are willing to show yourselves and take the video block off, that would be great. It's hard teaching to little blocks, but I understand because a lot of times I do these when I'm in the phone or I'm just not ready. But for those of you that I haven't met, I'm Sissy Williams, and I'm going to be talking about contract to close, due diligence, appraisals, and getting to the closing table. And I'm super excited to be teaching on this topic, and not really teaching. I just want to kind of make this more conversational. So I am going to ask y'all to probably unmute yourselves at times because I want to discuss kind of your knowledge and experience, and we can all learn from each other in regards to this. But the objective is to kind of go through the steps of the transaction from the time you get to binding to the closing, and best practices and ideas and suggestions and so on. So hopefully everyone will leave with at least some new and helpful information. Before we get started, if you would unmute yourselves, and I'd like for you to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience. How long have you been in real estate, and how comfortable are you with the contract to close process? And if I'm looking to see who's here, Greta, I see that you are already unmuted. Could you introduce yourself and tell us about your experience?
Yeah, I'm Greta Massey. I've been a realtor since October.
Okay.
And the only experience I have is I have bought and sold at least a dozen properties over the last 20 years of my own. So
okay. Personal purchases and so on.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Awesome. Let's see. Candace, are you able to unmute yourselves and introduce? Give you a second. You may not be able to. What about Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy. I got my license in February, and I am not comfortable because I've only done personal closes up to this date to a lot of, moving in the United States and that kind of thing. I bought a house when I was like 23.
Awesome.
I feel good about, showing, and I understand the listing process. But yeah, this will be a good class for me.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Appreciate that. Candace, wait.
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Candace. And what I'm trying to do, guys, is just get a gauge of everyone's experience level, because I don't want to, teach on something you don't need to know, but want to make sure I'm focusing on what you are here for. Go ahead, Candace. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, I've been licensed for 21 years. I just, you do things by habit for so long. I think it's great to take a refresher course from time to time, see how somebody does something differently. And there's always a way to learn, right?
Awesome. Exactly. And hopefully we'll be able to learn from you as well. Should give us some insight. Donna, are you able to introduce?
I am. Hi, Sissy. I'm Donna Patrick. I've been with Keller Williams in Roswell for about a year and a half. I've really only worked with buyers so far. I haven't had a listing yet. I've only been doing real estate full time. Probably about 6 months or so. So I'm still relatively new and eager to learn.
Okay, awesome. And let's see, Eric.
Good afternoon, Eric Muniz. I started at the Roswell office in January. I'm a rookie agent. I also have only been working with one buyer. I joke with him. I tell him he's my favorite buyer, and he says that I'm also your worst buyer. So that's the extent of my experience. Total tabla rasa, if you will.
Lost you there.
Oh, you don't hear me?
Yeah, there you go, Eric.
Yep. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Kara, you want to introduce yourself and tell us how long you've been in the biz?
Yes, ma'am. I have been out of the biz for as long as I was in the biz. I was licensed 25 years ago, worked for 12, 13 years, lots of different capacities, but mainly new construction, on-site sales, and took some years off with my kids, and now I'm back. So
Awesome.
here I am and excited to be here.
Glad you're here. And as a side note, Kara and I actually grew up on the same street, which is crazy.
Small world.
I know, a very small world. Okay, Lydia, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Lydia. I have been in the business for about 6 years now. Newer to KW. Having a pretty good year so far, just a little bit all over the place and crazy. And so I definitely want to know what you guys are doing differently, from contract to close and stuff like that.
Awesome. And I'm sure you'll be able to provide us some insight as well. Glad you're here. Let's see, James, you want to introduce yourself if you're able? All right, we'll skip you. You could be driving. Mary?
Hi, good afternoon. I am I would say still new agent, new in the business, new to Atlanta area, so struggling because I don't have a sphere. So I've been doing a lot of farming, and a lot of door knocking. And I actually have my first seller under contract. That seller
Congrats.
thank you. That seller took 10 months of marketing. So really worked on that one. And I've been actually took the entire weekend this weekend doing more marketing. I do have several buyers, but of course right now there's nothing, I can't find anything for the buyers that I have. So I'm focusing a lot on sellers and trying to get some listings right now.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Okay, let's see. Natalie, are you able to introduce yourself?
Hey, yes. So I am new to Keller Williams and new to real estate in general. So yeah, I'm just hoping to listen and learn today and see what I can.
Awesome. Okay. Michael, are you able to?
Hey, yeah, I've been with Keller Williams since September, but still feel like I'm a brand new agent, dual career. So, splitting my time, but, really looking forward to hearing more about the stuff we're going to talk about today, because I've never actually gone through it except, personally, bought and sold a few houses, but as far as like on the agent side, what you need to really focus on, I'm really looking forward to hearing about that.
Awesome. Glad you're here. Okay, Shalina. And I'll go on in case you're driving. Is it Sung A? Are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Sung A, and I've been in this business since 2012.
Okay, great. So you'll have some insight for us. And okay, Heather, are you? All right, is there anybody else? I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see everybody's names. Is anybody else able to introduce themselves? Hi.
Hi. So my name is Sarah Bullard, and I am a new agent. I did get my license in September, but I was part of the wrong brokerage at that point, so I didn't receive any training. And so I joined Keller Williams as a last ditch effort before I just gave up altogether. And just since the beginning of really February, I mean, I signed up with Aubrey at the end of January. And I have 4 kids, ages all the way from kindergarten into high school, so who are all home for remote learning right now. So my time is, I feel like I have a multi-career situation. I am really excited about learning about, this is the part I think of real estate that has me the most anxious, is protecting that earnest money. I am really good at following systems, but not good at creating them. So I am looking to grow in that area so that I can sleep at night instead of having a knot in my stomach all the time about this stuff.
Yes, and you know, I've been in almost 8 years and I sometimes still get knots. But yeah, the more we know, the more relaxed we can be, hopefully. Well, we're glad you're here. Is there anybody I missed that would like to introduce themselves? Okay.
I was late joining. Sorry. I'm Heather.
Hey, Heather, just if everyone's just introducing themselves and giving us some idea of how long they've been in the business.
Okay. I'm Heather. I've been in the business since I want to say like June, so not quite a year now. And I've only ever been with Keller Williams, and I just really love Keller Williams. All the training we get, I think it's awesome. So my internet, and I'm gonna have to be driving, so it's gonna be kind of spotty. So if I lose you guys, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Understand everybody's, you know, trying to do what they have to do. No worries. Anybody else? Did I miss anyone?
Oh yes, hey Sassy. Sissy,
Hey,
I'm
Larry,
sorry.
how are you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, so I'm Larry Cushenberry Jr. I've been in sales for a while. But I'm new to real estate. I just got in it, but I'm a people person. I love people, and I'm excited to be with you all and learn from the best.
Well, we're glad you're here. Is there anybody else? Okay, so I just really wanted to ask that to get a sense of everybody's experience in terms of what you know about the time period from when you go under contract to the closing and the different things that happen there. And I think we learn more when we share. So if you have something to share, please take yourself off mute, share it. If you have a question to ask, take yourself off mute and please ask it. And I'll ask a couple questions here and there that I will need kind of your response on. So thanks for your participation. So does anybody want to share exactly what due diligence is and what that time period is for? Does anyone want to give a stab at that?
I
So
will.
it's just the time that a prospective buyer has to examine the property and in depth more than they would just at a viewing or something, and determine if that property meets their needs, and also the integrity of the home is kind of what they're looking for if it's something they want to take on.
Exactly. And any inspections would be done during this period, the regular inspection, if there's any specialty things happening, radon testing would be done, mold testing, if there's a pool, you'd want to have a pool inspection, anything that, like you said, the buyer needs to look into more closely. Does everyone know when due diligence begins?
The day after.
Say that again?
The day after you sign the purchase and sale agreement.
So it begins on the binding agreement date. So if today is, what is today? The 29th, and all parties sign the contract, today is our binding agreement date, and the timeline begins to tick for all the contingencies, including due diligence.
Isn't day one the next day though?
So
Yes.
you start counting, yeah. So
Yeah,
today's the
start counting.
29th.
Okay.
One thing that I would recommend you do, and I'm sure those that have been in the business have made the same mistake that I've made before. When you are working on the contract with your buyer and you're setting your due diligence, look at a calendar. Make sure your due diligence is not ending on Christmas Day or Father's Day or something that might make it more challenging for all parties. I once had a contract and the due diligence ended on Father's Day, which isn't a huge deal, except that my buyer worked at a church, and Father's Day is kind of a big deal in some churches. And so he was unavailable on that last day of due diligence, which made things, he was my seller actually. And it made negotiating with a very difficult agent on the other end challenging, because there were some last minute things that came up and it was difficult to get him on the phone and nail that down. So just as a word of caution, just look at the calendar and make sure it's not ending on some wonky date. And some agents put in a stipulation that if a contingency ends on a weekend, that it would really end on the next business day at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, because what time does due diligence end? So say your due diligence is 7 days from now. 7 days from now, what time is due diligence over?
Midnight.
1:45 p.m. I don't know.
Say that again?
Midnight.
Like midnight, right before
Midnight.
midnight.
Okay. Midnight.
So nobody wants to be negotiating. I mean, sometimes we do what we have to do, but at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. So you're probably not on your best game at that hour. So keep that in mind if you want to put a special stipulation that due diligence shall end at 6 p.m. on the day that it ends. Something like that.
We just did Ignite. I feel like there's a form for that, or is it just a stip?
I think
You know-
that was just Melba's thing. She said, I don't do anything at late at night because I'm asleep. So she always writes in that it ends earlier in the day for her because it's, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would just put that in a stipulation. That should be appropriate. Those of you that are on this call that have been in the business a while, do you have anything you want to add in regards to that?
You know what happened? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You know what happened to me?
What?
I was the buyer's agent and it was open door. And you know how they get you to sign that addendum? I
Yes.
didn't really read that addendum. Clearly I didn't read it, right? So I called up the agent because our due diligence ended on Sunday and I was really stressed on Friday. I'm like, you're not contacting me. I'm about to terminate. And she emailed me back and she said, well, look at the addendum. So I looked at it and on the addendum, it said that if due diligence ends on a weekend, then open door extends it till Monday at 5 p.m.
Okay.
And I didn't read the 5 p.m. part clearly. And on Monday at like 4, I looked because I was like, let me verify. And at 4 p.m., I was like, oh shit. So, be careful with open door. I mean, we're under contract with them right now, but you need to be careful with that.
Yeah, and make sure, that's another great lesson on making sure you're reading all aspects of the contract, especially if it's something new and different, because there can be little things in there that are going to make a difference in terms of your deadlines and so on.
And Sissy, Sissy, I just wanted to add one thing. Even when I'm the listing agent, I take responsibility for the points of contact, including the pre-closer, including the lender on the buyer's side, and all the important deadlines. And I send that out first to the other agent and say, do you agree with all of these? And when they say yes, then they fill in their part. I don't always have who the pre-closer is or the lender, but they fill in their part. And then that gets sent out to all parties so that everybody's on the same date, on the same month.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I try to do that as well. And I don't know if you're newer, you may not have understood what Candace was saying, but once you have your binding contract, you then need to know what all the important dates are. And she is saying she forwards and communicates that with the other side, whether she's on the list side or the buy side, making sure that both agents are on the same page, because sometimes, people are off by a day. You think you're right, they think you're right. They think they're right. So, going ahead and making sure everyone understands the deadlines, especially your clients. That's one of the first things I do is I send them a list of important dates. And I say, today is your binding agreement to date. Your due diligence ends in 7 days on this date. This is what has to take place between now and the end of due diligence and so on. And I'm glad you brought that up, Candace, because another very important thing that you need to make sure you're doing is as soon as you go binding, get the binding, fully executed contract to the lender, if you're the buyer's agent, as well as making sure the attorney has it. And don't send it 3 days later because the timeline is ticking. The timeline's ticking on the due diligence, on the finance contingency, on the appraisal contingency, and most definitely the lender needs to be in the loop on any of those deadlines. So I'm glad you brought that up. All right. Any questions so far? Okay. One of the things, and I know a lot of you are working with buyers, you mentioned, are trying to work with buyers anyway. In a balanced market, due diligence for me has always been 10 to 14 days. Right now, obviously, it's super competitive. So you want to make that due diligence as short as possible if you can, because you've got to do everything in this market to be competitive with the other potential offers that you may be competing against. And so what I had a listing back in February. I saw everything from no due diligence to 10 days, which was laughable in this market because that's not nowhere near competitive enough if you know you're competing against multiple offers. Those of you that have been writing contracts lately and or have had accepted contracts, or you're working with sellers and you've accepted contracts, what are you seeing on the number of days of due diligence?
0 to 5.
0 to 5. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, but if you set the expectation with your buyer, hey, listen, we've got to do everything we can to be competitive. We're going to have a super short due diligence. I have inspectors that can get the job done in enough time, but we're going to have to move quickly, and make sure you're setting the stage for that. And then once I send those important dates to my buyers and my clients, I say the very next thing you need to do is call an inspector. And I give them several to choose from. And I say, go with whoever's first available in this market. And I'm only sending them ones that I know are good anyway. So you got to get it scheduled ASAP, and you need to make sure that you and or your buyer communicate to the inspector, hey, listen, we only have a 4-day due diligence, so that, and they understand, most of them, know what's happening. They all know what's happening in this market. So they'll be much more likely to, make things happen and a lot quicker. And usually you get those inspection reports back within a few hours to 24 hours max. Does anybody have anything they want to add on that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you ever call the inspectors for your clients just to make sure that you get them booked, or do you always let your clients do that? Give them the names and tell them that it's up to them to schedule it? And if you do, what if they're dragging their feet?
I typically have my clients do it themselves for a couple of reasons. One, you just may not have time, and you may have other things going on, and it truly is their responsibility. And they also have to pay for it when they schedule it. Now, there have been times, like I've had people traveling or different things going on, and that I have absolutely called and made the appointment. Whatever you've got to do to make it happen, but it's, they're going to have to pay for it in advance typically. So that's another reason I have them. But I stay on them. I'm like, you got to get this done. And then, I say, let me know as soon as you have it scheduled. If I don't hear from them, I'm calling them, have you reached out? But there's nothing wrong with scheduling it yourself if you have time to do that. Good question. And I think you all know this, but I do want to point out, and I'm not really sharing the screen today because I haven't mastered that quite yet. But on the purchase and sale agreement, page 1, section 8 is where you'll find the due diligence information, how many days are being offered, and if the seller is offering any additional monies. And then most of you, I'm sure, know this, but I'm just going to point this out. So the remainder of the purchase and sale agreement, the numbers correlate with all these boxes on the front. So on page 3 of the purchase and sale, kind of in the middle of the page, is a whole section telling you about the inspection and due diligence period. And I do recommend that you kind of read through that and just familiarize yourself with that. We're not going to do that today, but just know that that is there. Let's see. Okay, I mentioned that, to be competitive, you want to do a short due diligence, get the inspection scheduled ASAP, and make sure you're giving your buyer multiple options of inspectors to use. And you're communicating to the inspector that you've got the short due diligence period. And then the next big thing I would say, and I think anybody who's been in the business for a bit will agree, you want to set the expectation with your buyer that it is not uncommon for the inspection report to come back 50 or more pages. Because in the beginning of this business, when even I would see these for the first time, I'm like, holy cow, this house is falling apart. When really, that's just a good inspection report, and it's not uncommon. So don't be freaked out when you get 50 pages of an inspection report, because the inspector is supposed to let the buyer know everything wrong with the house, little things all the way to big things. And I'm talking missing switch plates, you know, that could be a whole paragraph or at least a picture. So those, just warn your clients in advance so that when they get it, they do not think the house is going to collapse. And I always have a conversation after that saying, when we get the report back, we'll both review it, then we'll go through it together and talk about what needs to potentially be addressed. We're going to be looking for things that are safety items and or big ticket items. And so by that, I mean, electrical issues can often be safety related issues. And so those are things that we will probably ask for. Big ticket items are things like the HVAC is 35 years old and is going to last another month, or the roof, you know, is in seriously bad shape. So those are things that we know your client is going to have to address if the seller does not. And those are things that are going to cost a lot of money. So we need to know that in terms of whether or not they want to move forward, and in terms of if there's an opportunity to renegotiate at that point. I don't know what you guys are seeing in this market, but there's not a whole lot of negotiating going on in terms of repairs right now. But these are things your client needs to know, because during the due diligence, they have the opportunity to back out if they're not comfortable with things. And then, of course, after we've reviewed the report, you'll be putting together the amendment to address any concerns. And this is where you're going to ask the seller to take care of items if that's what you're going to do. Anybody want to add anything to that or ask questions about this portion of due diligence once the report comes back?
Sissy, I do have a question for you. I know you've been doing this for a while, but for new agents who don't already have their own vendor list, should we just utilize the vendor list that's in command?
Use that, or reach out to other agents in the office and say, who do you recommend? Absolutely. Yeah. If they're in that in command, typically somebody, well, obviously somebody in KW has a relationship with them and they're worthy of being on that list. So absolutely, but feel free to ask other agents in the office, hey, who do you use? Who do you like? You know, I like an inspector that is thorough, but also one that is not going to freak a buyer out. And there are some inspectors that you're just like, are you kidding me? They make everything sound extremely urgent and scary, even little things. So as you are in the business, you will find out the ones you like prefer over others, but absolutely use the list, ask other agents. Good question.
Is that list, this list in command, is it similar to the list that's at the bottom of the emails from Melody? Is it the same list that they use in the office?
I have not compared them. I would imagine so.
I've never even seen it. Where is it?
Shalina, was that you that was talking?
Yeah, but I would have to go back and look for where I found it.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, but the list, go ahead, Michelle.
Was that a list of like the things in priority?
No, I think they're talking about vendor list.
Oh, yeah, I think Melody or Lucy has that maybe.
Okay.
I would really recommend, I would recommend with inspectors in particular to definitely have at least 3, because scheduling and, you know, if the buyers are going to schedule their own, you know, if they don't get a call back, you know, when they want from one, you know, then they get frustrated. So I would definitely have at least 3. And you can tell them your priority list, you know, like 1, 2, 3, but definitely have more than one.
Yes. Thank you saying that,
Just-
Kara.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, especially for new people, anytime you can attend the inspection, you will learn so much. So, and usually the inspector goes through the home and then there's a summary period where he or she will describe what is going on in the home to your clients. And if you can show up for the summary, that's very valuable and you'll learn so much about homes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And that is a question that you'll get from your buyers. Hey, should I go to the inspection? And I do try to go to all mine at least the last 30 minutes. Sometimes your schedule won't permit, but Candace is right. It's a great opportunity for you to learn. One thing I think that is courtesy and COVID, during all this COVID stuff, they've not allowed, some inspectors have not allowed anyone to be at the inspection but themselves. But that's opening up some. But I would recommend that once it's scheduled, that you reach out to the inspector and say, hey, my buyer would like to come. At what point in, say it starts at 3, it's a 3 o'clock inspection. What time do you think they should arrive? Because one thing that I don't like, and I know most inspectors don't like, is when the buyer's there the entire time, hovering over the inspector, asking questions. It takes so much longer. What my inspectors like is for the buyer to show up for the last 45 minutes to 30 minutes, as Candace said, and at this point they've seen everything, but they know kind of the highlights and they can point out things to your buyer. Oh, I noticed this. You might want to find out about this, and so on. Are you, those of you that go on your inspections, is this how you do it? Do you go for the whole time? Do you find that inspectors prefer you come towards the end?
Definitely towards the end.
Yeah, it just takes up too much of their time. Okay, and just ask your inspector, guys.
Yeah, and I would say preface that with your clients, set them up for here's how it works. He does his job or he or she does their job. We stay out of their way, and then you get to show up the last 30 minutes to get a summary. Because otherwise they're like, oh, well, I want to spend 3 hours there, and it takes 6 hours to do when they're there.
Exactly. And then everyone's annoyed, the seller, the inspector, and everybody. Thank you. So the report will come back. Sometimes I've had some inspectors that print it right there on site. He has a printer in his vehicle. I've got others that send it hours later or later that evening. But I've never waited more than 24 hours for a report. So just find out, when should we expect this? And then you're going to want to review it. Your client's going to, the way I do it, and everyone's going to have their own way. I make sure we both have a copy. And I say, I've received mine. Have you received yours? I'm going to be reviewing it. When is a good time for us to connect and talk about things? And then as I'm reviewing it, I'm making a list of things that I think probably need to be addressed. And I'm not then just, when I get with my client, I'm not saying, these are the things we need to take care of. I find out from them, what did you see on the report that concerns you? Because I don't want to bring up a concern if it's not a concern for them, unless of course they don't bring something that I see as a big red flag, like termite damage or, potential mold or something. But I let them lead that conversation, and then we discuss, as I mentioned, the big ticket items, any safety related issues, and we make a list of what we're going to ask the seller to address. It's a little trickier, I know, in this market. The listing that I had in February, the offer that was chosen because the buyer said, yeah, we want to do diligence. We want to do an inspection, but we don't care what it comes back as. We're not even going to ask for repairs. Well, that was a huge win for my sellers who lived out of state. So negotiating repairs is a little tricky right now. However, there are certain things that need to be dealt with. And, most buyers are not going to buy a house that need something, like if the electricals are all out of whack, that's something you're probably going to ask for. What are you guys seeing in this market in terms of negotiation?
That's a question I have around that is I was told, don't ask for anything and then ask for it later. And it seems like you really can't, right? I mean, there's nothing that would hold the sellers to fixing anything.
Right.
If you say, I'm not going to ask anything, but then something huge comes up and you're like, oof.
Okay, a great example. And the last closing that I just had, it was the buyer. And we didn't ask for anything in the initial offer. The report came back and there were some electrical issues, and radon came back. Well, way high. And we asked for that to be mitigated. And what you have to realize, and what sellers have to realize too, once they are aware of a situation, they then have to, like if your buyer backs out, they're going to have to share that information on the seller's disclosure with the next buyer. If it's new information to them, like the radon, it then has to be disclosed. So they're going to likely be addressing that for the next buyer, if not your buyer. You know, that's an example of something kind of big. Now, if it's something smaller, they may be like, yeah, we're not going to fix it. We don't have to. I've got 10 backup offers. So that's kind of the position you're in, but you don't know until you ask, you know?
So if I said no due diligence,
okay,
then, you know, I can ask.
Okay, so you're saying if you offer no due diligence on the offer?
Yes.
But you're still inspecting?
Yes. Right to inspect. Like your client
Okay.
said, we want to inspect, but we're not going to ask for repairs, but something ginormous like the radon is disclosed. This is where it gets kind of tricky to me.
So if you do no due diligence with the right to inspect and something big like that comes up, yes, of course, you can ask. You can always ask. They can say no. Then what are you going to do? If you back out and you've got no due diligence and you're not backing out for a finance or appraisal reason, you're then losing your client's earnest money.
Correct.
Yeah. So those are that's just something you have to be aware of if you're doing the right to expect no due diligence, that you could potentially lose the earnest money if something so big comes up that the seller doesn't address it or won't address it and your buyer, you know, is not willing to move forward.
Okay.
I think in that situation, it's all about, you know, the buyer's understanding when they submit their offer of what they're actually doing. You know, like, yes, this is great. You'll be competitive. If radon comes back, if termites come back, you either assume that, you know, or you lose your earnest money. You know, I think it's an expectation thing, and it just depends on how risky they're willing to go, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Greta?
It kind of does. I'm still like, I just had this, like I lost an offer, you know, because we had asked for a right to request repairs, and the other people didn't, and they still inspected, and they came back with radon, and they still fixed it. And so I was a little pissy about it.
You mean the seller still agreed to fix it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, what do I do then?
But you know, here's the thing, you don't know in that situation. That seller very well could have said, no, not fixing it. So you don't know in that scenario.
True.
Does anybody?
I have a question. Even with the right to repair, if the seller chooses not to fix those items, I think the buyers can still terminate and get the earnest money back. That's what I learned. I could be wrong.
Okay.
No, you're right.
There's a notice, I think. You have to give notice.
Who was trying to say something?
She's saying that. I was trying to say something. I'm driving. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, I always negotiate. I do about 5 days and then 2 days to negotiate. And if we can't come to agreement, then the buyer gets terminated, was my understanding, if both parties can't agree.
Right, as long as you're within your due diligence period. But what Sung Lee, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, you were saying that with no due diligence?
Yeah, with no due diligence, but in the repair items, if both parties cannot come to agreement, I believe the buyer can terminate and still get the earnest money back.
Yeah, that's what Melba taught us in our class, is that if we do a property right with to request repairs, that we could ask for 14, sorry about the crying, my little girl's crying.
No,
but that we could, if the seller refused to fix the product that was deemed currently broken, that we could then still back out and get our earnest money. But it couldn't be for things that are not currently failed at the moment. It couldn't be like, oh, hey, that might fail in a month. It has to be failed right now.
Yeah, like a 17-year-old HVAC system. And that was the right to inspect. Is that a separate?
F273.
Say that again.
F273.
F273 is the right to inspect exhibit. So I would recommend all of us download that, read that, and make sure that we understand that, because I think that makes a huge difference there. And I've never used that, I'll tell you personally, but that's something that right now may help get an offer accepted.
Is that right to inspect or right to request repairs? Because I think they're two different things.
Right to request.
Right to request repairs, yeah.
Yeah, if you're asking for the right to request repairs, they have to agree, or you can back out and keep your earnest money. If you say we're going to inspect, but we're not going to ask for any repairs, that's different.
Two different things.
Oh, got it.
That's
got
a
it.
different
I see what
thing.
you're saying. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
It's
That's
two
the difference.
separate forms. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's two entirely separate forms that look similar.
Okay. That's how I understood it. So now that makes more sense. So I would suggest we print both of those, read them, and make sure we fully understand those. And I'm sorry, I can't provide more clarification, but if Melba said it, I will go with what Melba said. Let's see. Okay, so let's assume we've written up the amendment to address concerns. We've presented to the seller. They come back. The seller can agree to do all of it. The seller can agree to do none of it. The seller can then agree to do a portion of it. And at that point, your buyer, if you're within due diligence, has the option to accept, what the seller's agreed to do, to continue to attempt to negotiate. Okay, you won't do that, but will you do this? And that's where you're going to come in handy and helpful in advising them and working with the other agent how to kind of get to an agreement for both sides. If your buyer is not pleased with what has been agreed to do, they can walk away and get their earnest money back as long as you're within that due diligence period. And does anybody know what you need to do to officially terminate an offer in that scenario?
Is it
I
the
just know you have to notice.
Is it the unilateral notification?
To terminate, correct. And you will have that signed by your clients, and you will present that and make sure the agent knows that it's coming over. Okay, so any other questions about due diligence? Okay, so once due diligence is over, the only other way your clients can get out of the contract without losing their earnest money is going to be either the finance or the appraisal contingencies, because those are going to be the only contingencies you still have, assuming you have those contingencies. If you have an all cash offer, there's obviously not going to be a finance contingency, but your buyer has the option to do a appraisal contingency. With any all cash offers that I've ever been a part of, the buyer has waived that contingency. But just so you know, the buyer does have the right to do that. On the all cash exhibit, In section 5, there's a selection where it says, buyer set forth herein, this agreement shall or shall not be subject to the property appraising for at least the purchase price. Be sure you check one of those boxes, shall or shall not. And then there 5B says the appraiser shall be selected by, and you're going to check either the buyer or the seller or other. And all parties agree that this appraiser shall only perform a single certified appraisal of the property. So again, your buyer does have the right to have an appraisal on that. Any questions about the all cash? So one thing that I think that I know is very important to do, you want to make sure before you present an offer or write up an offer that you've had some type of conversation, voice to voice, phone, email, whatever, with your buyer's lender, and make sure you understand the timelines the lender needs. Lenders know this is crazy competitive market, so they're trying to be super quick and competitive with their finance and appraisal contingencies, the number of days they need. But I always check with that lender, especially if it's a new lender I've not normally worked with. You know, how many days do you need? What's the shortest amount we can do to make this as most competitive as possible? Anybody want to add anything to that or ask questions in regards to that? Okay. Again, as I think Candace mentioned earlier, make sure that the lender already has a copy of the binding and fully executed contract, so they have all these dates. And if you add any exhibits or amendments in the process that are going to change any of these dates, they need that information as well. Make sure they've got that so they are in the loop and there are no surprises for them. Like if the closing date changes, anything like that, it's going to be super important for them to know. The appraisal will be ordered by the lender. Buyers don't pick out their own appraisers. The lender is going to order that for them. Typically, at least my lenders, they wait until due diligence is over so that your client isn't unnecessarily paying for an appraisal. In case they back out during due diligence. Let's see, questions so far? Okay. Right now, we are seeing a lot of buyers waiving appraisals, and that's hard to compete with. I've seen it even on, not just cash offers, but with financing as well. So anybody else seeing that? If you've been in any transactions lately.
We did an appraisal, but we said we would cover up to X amount. We put in a cap of what we would do over, so they knew right away. I mean, like we put in I felt competitive offer, but I had to kind of protect their upside. So,
okay, so
there was a cap.
Okay, so Greta, you're saying in your special steps, you said buyer is, you're waiving that, but they'll pay over the appraised amount up to a certain amount.
Yes.
Yep. I'm seeing some of that too. Anybody have questions about that step that Greta specifically used?
Not related to that specific stipulation, but I am a little bit confused, if I may back up a little bit.
Yes, please.
Did I hear correctly when you said that the buyer has the option to waive the appraisal? Is that what I heard? I thought.
Yes.
I thought that was a lender requirement, that they had to make sure.
Thank you. I was just about to back up a little bit there. The buyer can't just say, yeah, I'm not doing it. There has to be a discussion with the lender. The lender's got to approve that they can do that they are capable of financially doing that, and that the lender is okay with that. So, yes, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's clearer. Yeah, I thought it was a unilateral buyer decision, and I got it.
Thank you.
Clear now. Thank you.
Can you give us an example when a lender might agree to the buyer waiving an appraisal? Like, what would have to happen in order for that to be okay with the lender?
and that this is probably a question you want to ask specifically to a lender. I'll tell you my experience with this. So in representing the seller, had 33 offers. Offer came in 30,000 above an already high list price. And they said they were waiving the appraisal contingency, which is a big deal. And so I got on the phone with the lender, the buyer's lender, and just said, hey, I'm representing the seller. Your client has got a great offer on the property. They are waiving the contingency. And I want to make sure that this is something that can be done. And the buyer had given their lender permission to speak with me. And she said, yep, they're capable of doing it. They've got enough money in the bank to cover it, blah, 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 blah. So that's probably to get more clarification from the lender to answer your question. But also, if you receive an offer that they're willing to do that, I would have a conversation of some sort with the lender verifying.
Does that mean they need to, that gap has to be closed in cash? It's not something that's a part of like the down payment or anything else. It's completely separate. They're saying that I have $30,000 to bring to closing to close that gap. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes. So let's say the appraisal comes back, it's at or above the price. Okay. Obviously that's easy. Everybody's moving forward. If it comes back lower, the buyer, these are the options. We then ask the seller typically, hey, it only appraised for X amount. We'd like for the seller to come down to the amount it appraised for. Seller has the right to say yes or no. In this market, they're probably going to say no. They're not going to do that. If they do say no, the buyer then has a couple of options. There are a few different options at that point. The buyer can say, well, you're not going to come down to what it appraises for. I'm walking away. And they can get the earnest money back because they're still within their contingency if they have not waived that contingency. Or they can say, no problem. If it doesn't appraise, we'll make up the difference in cash because the lender's not going to loan anybody more money than the house is worth. But so they have to make up that difference out of pocket. Yes, totally new money, so to speak. The other option is that the appraisal can be contested. That is something that the listing agent has to do. The listing agent then has to go to, so you as a buyer's agent, call the listing agent, hey, it didn't appraise, this is what it came in at. If it's decided to contest it, the listing agent then presents his or her information to the lender. First of all, review the appraisal. You need to look at everything, make sure, they haven't given misinformation on number of bedrooms, square footage, lot premiums, things like that. Look at the comps they used. If the comps seem way out of line with what should be a comp, then you need to the listing agent will pull the comps and use those. Say, hey, this is what I use. Why did you use these? I have not, luckily, had a lot of problems. I've only had one house ever come back that had appraised about 8,000 under. And the way it was my buyer, and the way we handled it is the seller agreed to come off the price 4,000, and my buyers agreed to come up with the additional 4,000 in cash because we felt like the comps used were crazy. We did try to contest that one, didn't have any luck. So that's how we came to that agreement. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here.
If you can't come to an agreement, is it still possible you can walk away? Your buyers can then walk away and be like, it didn't appraise. They can still keep their earnest money. So that's a second opportunity to keep their earnest money.
Yes, as long as you are in your time frame of that appraisal contingency.
And how long does that last?
Does that make sense?
How many days does your lender have for appraisal times?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there. Ask me that again.
how many days does your lender have to complete an appraisal like that? I guess that time period, like I understand due diligence, 0 to 14 days, but what is the appraisal contingency time?
So before I ever write an offer, I make sure that I've reached out to the lender, had some type of conversation saying, we're trying to be super competitive. How many days do you need for the appraisal and finance contingencies? I ask them. And so, you know, I'm seeing, I don't know what you guys are seeing in a normal market, 21 to 28 days. In this market, I'm seeing 0 because sorry, not on the appraisal, excuse me. You know, if they're not waiving it, I'm seeing 7 to 14 days. Anybody seeing anything different on that? So again, it's important to be aware of your timeframes and make sure all this is happening and you know when that appraisal has been ordered and that there's going to be enough time and so on. Any questions?
Sissy, can I get clarification? I want to make sure I understood you correctly. I thought that you said earlier that a buyer can waive the appraisal. Were you referring to the appraisal contingency period, or were you referring to the actual appraisal? I think Eric mentioned that that's a lender requirement. So that's what I need clarification on.
Thank you. And you're right. I did not make that clear. And it's the appraisal contingency.
That's
The
what
buyer can, yes, the contingency. Does that
Okay,
answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So the lender, if you're getting financing, the lender is going to require an appraisal, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
I think the other thing, when we went into appraisals, the first thing you talked about was the cash buyer and where you could have appraisal with cash buyer. That was, I think, where we started down that road and we skipped over that other amendment. So I think that's where the confusion was.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Thank y'all for catching that. Yes, the appraisal contingency, not the appraisal itself. Yeah, because on the cash, that is the only one where you don't have to have one. Anybody done or had buyers with an FHA or VA loan? Okay. Something to be aware of with these types of loans. The appraisal, they're obviously going to do an appraisal, but there's no contingency period, meaning that appraisal can take all the way up to the day of closing. Does that make sense? And that is why when you are competing with multiple offers and you have a FHA or VA buyer, which these are great loans and there's nothing wrong with these loans, but when you're competing, a lot of times you may lose out to a conventional loan and cash because of, that appraisal contingency gets out of the way. Whereas FHA, VA loan, they go right up to closing. So if there's an issue, you might not know about that until days before closing. Knock on wood, I've never had that happen. The appraisals for these loans typically come back in plenty of time, but there's not that added protection, if you will. So that's why a seller might feel those loans are a bit more risky, if you will. That makes sense? Any questions about that? Okay. So once you've made it through your due diligence period, your finance, your appraisal contingencies, you're skipping your way to closing, hopefully. And in the very beginning, once you've gone binding, I've already mentioned the lender and the attorney should have received a copy of the fully executed contract because they need those dates. They've got to get your closing date on their calendar tentatively. And it's important to remember any amendments that are added in the process, any additional exhibits, any changes that you're sending that to the attorney as well. It's also super important. The attorney is going to be communicating with your client, asking and requesting information that they need from your client. Many times what I've seen, those emails go unanswered, or the buyer or the seller, whatever, hasn't turned in their information to the attorney. Make sure you're reaching out and in touch with your client. Hey, have you sent the requested information to the attorney? Make sure they have what they need, because if the attorney doesn't have the information they need, that can delay closing. And so, when you say that to a client, usually that snaps them back into reality to get it done. And it's a lot of information they're being asked for, but everything, as we know, once you're under contract, the clock is ticking and it's time sensitive. Also, make sure prior to closing with the attorney that you communicated anything that might not be typical, or for instance, somebody gets hospitalized and they can't.
She just frozen.
Yes.
I thought it was me.
No, it's her. Let me let her know. Hold on. She's back.
I don't know what happened. Sorry. And I don't know where it was. So, if a power of attorney is needed, or, your client says, I don't want to show up, I want to sign in advance, or, I want to sign by mail, speak with your contact at the attorney's office and make sure that that's doable. And if so, what's required to do that? Just make sure you're communicating. Make sure that you've turned in your commission agreement and your disbursement authorization form if you're being paid at close. And also, don't be afraid to ask your contact there or the attorney themselves any questions. We don't know what we don't know. That's how we learn, and it's okay not to know everything in this business, obviously, since there were some questions you asked me I couldn't answer or wasn't very clear on. So ask, that's how we get better, and nothing to be embarrassed in regards to that. And then I recommend that you check in with the attorney, your contact at the attorney's office at least a week prior to the closing. Hey, making sure you have everything you need. Do this also with the lender. Make sure you have everything you need. Is there anything lacking? Because the attorney is going to need, if you've requested a clear termite letter, the attorney is going to have that. If a home warranty has been ordered, the attorney is going to have all that type of information. So the job's never over until you're walking away from the closing table. And even then it's not over, because you want to maintain that relationship that you've hopefully built with your client at that point. Are there any questions? Is there anything that you learned that you didn't know already that might help you moving forward?
Yes. I just being in retail. This may sound crazy, but just analogies. I love analogies. Being in retail, you see like that, transaction. And it's just simple. Just just listen. You understand. Just break down the detail of the real estate transaction. Is just really exciting, because there's so many working parts, and
yeah.
It's just this detail they go into it. I haven't had my first transaction, but I'm excited just listening to you. So I thank you for your
You will. You broke up a little bit, Larry, but what I heard was that you like an analogy, and you compared this a little bit to retail, and you're excited about all the different facets of the process. And I would say with real estate transactions, there are lots of steps and processes and things you'll be involved with. And I know it won't be long before you will have your first one. Sorry, we're not able to hear you very well.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Anybody else have anything?
If
Larry,
no one,
you,
go ahead.
Well, it's been very helpful for me. I really appreciate all the practical advices, such as be there for the inspection 30 to 40 minutes toward the end part, manage your buyer so he won't get in the way. So all of that is very, very practical. And so what it's done for me, it's given me a little bit more confidence. Even I have not been through my first closing yet, but this is really helpful. It gives me more confidence. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Eric. Thank you for participating. And, I think in this business, I wasn't confident for a super long time because there are so many aspects and pieces of the puzzle, but I promise you guys, every time you do it, you'll get a little better and you'll get more confident. And I think the good and challenging thing is I don't think you ever really perfect this profession because it is something new. Every transaction is different. And I really honestly feel like I learn something new every single day. And I learn from people that have a lot more experience than me, and I learn from people that have less than me because we all experience different things within a transaction. So I think sharing and really talking about how you've experienced some of this is helpful to everybody.
Sissy, I have a question. Can you speak a little bit to building rapport between the two sides, the listing agent and the buyer's agent? What's important to you from the listing side? What would you recommend to buyer's agents as far as communication and building that rapport, building that relationship to have a smooth transaction?
That's a great question. In any market, I think it's important. In this market, especially when I've been on the list side, I will tell you, I was so incredibly busy with 90 showings in 48 hours, 33 offers. I promise you my phone, and if some of you have had listings in the last few months, you know this, it didn't stop ringing. I didn't stop getting texts. It was nonstop. And rightfully so. As a list agent, I think it's important that you are communicating with the agents who are presenting offers, that you are confirming I have received your offer, even if it's just a text. I ended up making like a blank email and text that I could literally copy and paste to each agent. So I wasn't retyping a text 75 times in one day. So they would know, thank you, I have received your offer. There are multiple offers on the table. If I don't respond right away, please know that I will, kind of just setting the stage that I got it. You're not being ignored, but there's no way I can talk to 500 people today. But on the buy side, I'll tell you one thing I so appreciated with those offers coming in is, a text, Sissy, I've just emailed you an offer. Please confirm receipt. This is kind of the gist of what I would get. I know you're super slammed today and likely have received a lot of offers. Just want, them acknowledging they knew, that a lot was going on my side as well, but they wanted acknowledgement as well. Another thing were agents that, and I did obviously pick up the phone any and every time I could, agents that would call and say, hey, I know you've likely got a lot of offers. Is there anything that you can tell me that would be helpful for us to know before we present? And then, you're limited on some things that you can say, but things that were important were, I communicated right up, my clients have already moved. So the sooner you can close, the better, and I've made sure whatever I shared with one client, I shared with all of them. And I think that's important on the list side, that you can't tell one agent, early close date, and then act like it's no big deal to the next agent. If you tell one something, they've all got to be told the same thing. And so that's a whole nother, I think, mastermind is kind of dealing with multiple offers. But building rapport, I think for me, that's a huge part of this business. We're all working hard. I mean, buyers agents, listing agents, and this is not an easy business. So don't be a jerk to the other side, because our end goal is the exact same thing, is to get our clients to the closing table. It's not to who can bully the best, it's how can we win for all parties so that everyone feels like they've gotten, they're getting something great out of it. And that's just my philosophy. So I think building rapport is just I treat other agents how I would want other agents to treat me, regardless of what side I'm on. So I think that's a great question. That's a big part of this business because you will encounter so many of these agents over and over again. Some you'll never work with again, maybe one time, but you remember the ones that were jerks and difficult for the sake of being difficult. It's one thing to fight for your client and be a great negotiator. It's another thing to be a jerk for the sake of being a jerk, plain and simple. This business is too hard. Life's too short. I mean, just be kind and get your job done on behalf and do the best you can for your client. That was a very long-winded answer. I hope it answered your question.
I have one. One's for me and one's for Laura Vance. She had to step out to a pediatrician appointment. Mine is, it's on the listing side with the seller. It's not so much contract to close as it is when you get an inspection report back and there's, a dozen things and you have a seller that's, headstrong and like, nope, not doing it. But there are some items that, as a good realtor, he or she will have to disclose for the next buyer. Have you dealt with that? Do you automatically say, okay, well, we need to, if you decline and they walk away, we need to update your property disclosure. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes. Oh yeah. You'll have people that take it personally, like you're personally attacking them when it's just something that needs to be fixed. And people do get defensive and I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I think exactly what you said. I think you have to say, okay, Kara, if you're not willing to do this, I can go back to the other side and let the agent know that you're not agreeing to any of this. Here are some options of how this can play out. If you're lucky, the buyer is going to want this house so much that they're going to be like, okay, they're going to move forward. But there's a very good chance because these are pretty big items. They're, maybe they're safety related or whatever. Maybe it's radon, maybe it's mold, whatever. These are items that you are now aware of. So you are now going to have to disclose them. So just want you to know that if this buyer walks away, we're going to have to update, or you're going to have to update your seller's disclosure, and that is going to be disclosed to the next buyer. And I'm just going to tell you, with my personal experience in this business, the next buyer is going to want this done. I think it's probably in your best interest to go ahead and do this. But if you don't want to, I just want to be very clear on how it could play out. Doesn't mean it will play out that way, but they could walk away and you are going to have to disclose it to the next person. Did that answer yours, Kara?
It did. That's pretty much what I thought. I was curious if you had either had to walk away from a listing or had it, blow up a deal or, anything like that. But I think, I think it's if you have a conversation, then it probably, that's all you can do.
Right. And a lot of times the seller is just emotional and wants to vent and get ticked off and be understood and heard. And if you let them cool down, sometimes I'll say, okay, why don't we think about it? Why don't we touch base in the morning? Give them, you can read your client and you might be able to figure out what their personality type is and what they might need. Because sometimes they just need the opportunity to settle down. I'm that way. If I get some crazy news, I'm going to be very reactive. But once I've had time to absorb it and think clearly and be level-headed, then I'm going to be a little smarter about it. So sometimes that's what it takes. But your question reminded me of something I did not tell you guys, and this is kind of a big deal to me anyway. So when you present your amendment to address concerns to the seller side, I always send only the portions of the inspection report that correlate with the request being made. How I do it is I print those particular pages that have pictures, like we're asking the seller to fix all the wood rot around the window. Well, they don't know what window. even if you say at the front of the house on the left corner, I provide the portion of the report that shows a picture of exactly where that is. That way there are no questions asked. Well, we fixed the window. Well, yeah, you fixed the wrong window. And it also is good to have a visual. I send that when I send the amendment to address concerns, and then I ask the agent, we're happy to send you the full report if you would like that as well. I don't automatically send the full report because a lot of agents don't want it, or the buyer or seller don't want it. Some do. So just that's how I do it. You can do it how you want to do it.
Thank you. Laura Vance wanted me to ask so she can go back in the recording and watch it, about when you're representing the seller and there's multiple offers, dealing with offers with pre-qual versus pre-approved. Do you weight them differently? Do you just, she said she's, she mentioned in her text to me about most agents are, saying pre-approval letter, I guess, with market conditions, or do you have anything to say about that?
You cut off right there at the end, Kara. What I got was, do you weigh pre-approval or fully approved differently? And you kind of cut it out.
I think she was saying that, I guess maybe with current market conditions, a lot of agents are, she used the word demanding, but I'll be nicer and say we're requiring pre-approval letters for their offers they're considering. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, you're saying pre-approval versus already fully approved, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
She said pre-qualified versus pre-approval. So that's what I'm taking it to mean.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, and I will tell you, a lot of lenders are proactively just doing that. And I am telling my buyers, I've got one buyer right now who's just dragging her feet, and I'm trying to explain when we go to present your offer, the more that we can have in your favor, the better, because we know, especially the price point she's in, we're going to be a multiple offers. So yeah, if I've got somebody who has just had a 1 minute, 5-minute conversation with the lender, is, pre-qualified, versus someone who's approved, I'm definitely going to suggest to my seller that they go with that one, pending everything else is kind of in line. There's lots to look at with multiple offers. I know Aubrey, I think it sent out a link to a Google document for kind of a quick glance if you're in a multiple offer situation. I have an Excel sheet that I've used for years where I lay it all out, because it does come down to more than just, I can make $5,000 more on this offer, but this offer, gosh, they're not going to ask for repairs and they're not going to do this. So you need to look at them all side by side. So if I'm looking at two offers side by side and you've got a buyer that has already been qualified, they're ready to roll, and this offer isn't, and everything else is kind of in line, that's the one I'm going to recommend my client go with. But I would also say, call the lender. And there's nothing wrong with that, to call the lender of the buyer who's put it. You need to be doing that. Make sure these people are good to go. And the lender will share with you what they can, but you'll get a good sense of, their ability to move forward, if that makes sense. I hope that answered.
Yeah, and it made me think of something. And if the market wasn't as crazy as it is now, if you're counter offering and you notice that they have a pre-qual letter, but they, didn't include the pre-approval, but you like the deal, could you counter and say, provide pre-approval within 48 hours, I guess, or would that fall under one of the financing contingency things? I guess it wouldn't.
I think you could. And you can also have a conversation with the other agent, say, hey, this offer looks so great. My seller is very interested, but has a lot of reservations about the fact that your client, isn't fully approved. Could you make that happen and kind of, get that ball rolling?
Right.
I don't see anything wrong with that. Here's where you're at a disadvantage as the buyer's agent. So, and I'm using myself as an example just because I've been through this. and it's my experience, the 33 offers that were received on my listing, there was no time to go back and forth and have any, we're not countering. There was no time for that. And that's a conversation that I had up front with my sellers, knowing that it would likely be a multiple offer situation. How do you want me to handle it? Are you comfortable with me communicating upfront with the agents? If we get in a multiple offer situation, that we are in a multiple offer situation, please go ahead and present your highest and best. We're not going to go back and forth. There wasn't enough time. I mean, it was absolute insanity. So when you're presenting an offer and trying to be competitive, don't make it harder for the listing agent to do extra steps, because they're not going to have time to do that.
Sissy.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
One thing probably one of the only things I learned from my old brokerage was in this situation that to get them in the best position possible, not to really get clients out there looking at homes, buyers out there looking at home after the pre-qual is one thing, and that pre-approval really is the best position to be in. But that if you wanted to go a step further and have a loan commitment letter drafted by the lender and include that with the offer, that's like, hey, we are literally ready to go. We have all of this financial side is 100% done. That loan commitment letter has won them so many houses already.
That is a great point. Absolutely. That's huge. And I did see one of those in the 33 offers that this particular listing received. So that is huge. Another thing that I saw done that your lender will probably do for you, I had a lender proactively call me, and it was actually the one that won the offer. Their lender called me and said, hey, this before I even had a chance to reach out to her. I'm representing Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I know they've offered on your listing. I just wanted to give you a call and let you know they're fully approved, and she just went down the list of how great these clients were. She even said, they let me know I could share this with you. They've lost out on multiple homes. That's why they're willing to waive the appraisal contingency. They can make up the difference. She kind of put me at ease, and knowing, oh my gosh, I've got a really great lender on the other end. This is going to happen. So I thank you for bringing that up. That's huge. And that will give your buyer an extra, point in this crazy market. Does anybody else have any experience with that or anything they want to add?
I can just add that we've been told in productivity coaching, they emphasize that it's good to work with a local lender that's willing to reach out to the listing agent to do exactly as what you just said, to sort of plead your buyer's case that they're a really strong buyer, and it just makes it look like the lender is accessible and there to communicate. So it just makes your offer that much stronger.
It really does. And I know Kathy Vitale here in the office, they will do that for you at shelter. And if you're working with another lender, just have those conversations up front and let them know that's something you need them to do for your client.
Can you speak to the difference between working with a local lender as opposed to some of the bigger online lenders? I have a buyer that recently told me she wants to use Rocket Mortgage, and I tried to emphasize how important it is to have someone local where you can actually walk into their office and get answers or get them to move things along when you need to. Do you have any experience working with larger banks or online mortgage companies?
And this is what I tell my buyers when I'm meeting with them, and I say, have you already spoken to a lender yet? 9 times out of 10 they haven't. No, I haven't. Okay, well, I'm going to give you, before I leave here today, 3 lenders that I work with, because I never want to just give them one and them to think I'm pushing something on them. I want to give them options, and I always give them an option of people my clients have had a good experience with. And I say to them, I get, because I think sometimes buyers don't understand and think maybe we get something out of using someone we prefer to them. So I make it very clear. Donna, I don't get anything out of you using one of my preferred lenders other than peace of mind. My experience is with buyers that I've worked with in the past that have worked with a big bank or some of these other companies that, you know, online companies, is you are just a number to them. There's no relationship. So I really feel strongly that you need to work with somebody either I have a relationship with or you have a relationship with already, because they're going to be more likely to get us what we need when we need it. And the folks that I work with, I send them a lot of business. So they want to do a great job for my clients. They want to see a successful transaction and they want you to be happy. So they're going to do a great job because they want me to send them future buyers. So the only thing I get is peace of mind and knowing that you're going to be taken care of, which is my priority. And then I've been able to give a few examples of bad experiences with big banks. And one, you know, think of, I'm not going to say anything, but big bank, very well qualified client. I mean, he could have paid cash, you know, for an $800,000 house, but he didn't. So it's not like there were issues with him getting financed, but they were a disaster. We had to push closing back 2 times. Over it ended up being 2 weeks after the original close date because they were just a stack of papers. They got to them when they got to them. It wasn't a priority, even though my client and I both were calling, what do you need? What can we get to you? Da, 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 da. We'd send, the client would send something. 3 days later, they'd ask for the same thing again. Like that has happened 3 times, 2 different big banks. And so when a client says to me, oh, I want to use so-and-so because I bank with them. I'm like, that's a great story. However, let me tell you why I suggest that you don't. And I just share with them the experiences that we've had. And I told that client in particular where the closing got pushed back 2 weeks, I told him those stories. He still wanted to go with his big bank. After it was over, he said, I owe you a huge apology. If I ever do this again, I will listen and I will go with the local lender. And if I want to refinance later with the big bank, fine. But this has been the worst experience of my life. So I share those stories, and you can share other people's story, other agent stories if you don't have any yet, explaining why it's best to go with the local lender. And, you know, I make sure they know, shop around if you want. Every lender I work with is going to be honest with you. If they can't give you the best deal, they're going to tell you that. But I'm pretty much can guarantee they're going to be able to be competitive with any big bank or online company. And you're going to get personal attention and service. And we're going to get our questions answered when we have them, you know? Did that help, Donna?
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful. I know it's a lot of information. You know, these are the types of conversations, honestly, that we could have every day and learn something new, me included. And that's why it's great to pop in on some of these calls when you are able, because you'll pick up at least something. And then if it spurs other questions, reach back out to me privately or to someone else to make sure you get the clarification you need, because I want to make sure that you understand. And if I can't explain it, I will find somebody who can for sure. But hopefully you have a better understanding of, you know, the contract to close time period, the importance of getting the executed contract to the lender, to the attorney, and to make sure that you've communicated the important dates to your clients and the other agent, making sure you're both on the same page and agree what those dates are, and that you're keeping an eye on those time frames. Don't let it slip up on you like the day of and be like, holy cow, this is end of due diligence. We haven't even, don't put yourself through that. Don't put your client through that. It puts you at a severe disadvantage. And you know, your job is to do the best you can for your client. So just keep an eye on those timelines. I'm trying to think, what are some other important things? setting expectations, I think, is huge. And throughout the entire real estate process, but this is when I see clients really start to stress out, because once you're binding, I don't think, even though you tell them, it's going to be very fast paced from binding to the close date, they don't really get it, especially with these short due diligence periods and a lot of information coming in. So just set the expectation. You remain calm, because you'll probably be stressed out and freaking out too. I know many times I am, but you can't ever let your clients see that, because part of our job is to, bring them through this process as in a stress-free as possible way as we can. And you can freak out to your partner later, or people here in the office, but be cool, calm, and collected, and fake it till you make it with your clients for sure. They will appreciate your calmness, because it is a stressful situation. I say that a real estate transaction, even in the best of circumstances, when someone's moving into their dream home, it's still stressful. And if you add in components like a divorce, or someone who's being forced to downsize, or an elderly person who is leaving the home they've raised their children in, there's a lot of emotion on top of an already stressful scenario. So I feel like part of our job is to keep everybody calm. And sometimes that includes the co-opting agent. If they're losing their minds, do your best to kind of keep it together for everybody, and it'll be worth it in the end. So I hope that's helpful. Do not hesitate to call me or email me if you have any questions. My email is Sissy, and Sissy is spelled with an S, S-I-S-S-Y, sissysoldit@gmail.com. And good luck to all of you that are new. I know that you'll be getting some transactions before you know it. And believe me, almost 8 years in, I'm still learning. So be patient with yourself, and y'all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Sissy.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sissy.
You're welcome.